The gravel path was untouched. The air outside hung heavy and still, as though the visitor had vanished into the mist. Paul frowned. Someone came to see who was here, to check the house. Maya's voice felt thin. But why leave so suddenly? Maybe they didn't want to be seen. He turned away from the door, or maybe they confirmed what they needed to. Her breath caught. What do you mean? He hesitated. Maybe they wanted to know if we're actively trying to open the vault. Her legs weakened beneath her. She leaned against the wall for support, pressing her palm flat against the peeling paint, as though she could anchor herself to something real. I can't do this, Paul, she whispered shakily. I can't protect my daughter from this. I can't fight people who erase records, who hide vaults, who break into houses without leaving a footprint. Paul stepped toward her, steady and calm. Then we don't fight them alone. We stay smart. We stay ahead. She shook her head, grasping for breath. We can't stay ahead. They're already here. Paul looked at her with a firmness she wasn't expecting. Listen to me. You're not thinking clearly. That vault. He gestured toward the basement door. It's overwhelming you. That vault is going to ruin my life, she whispered, or save it, he replied. His words hung in the air like a double-edged sword, because he was right. The gold could save her daughter from every hardship. It could lift them out of poverty forever. It could rewrite both of their lives. But it could also destroy everything. Maya swallowed hard. If people start talking, if more people come. Paul sat across from her again, elbows resting on his knees, brow furrowed. We keep this quiet. We keep the house locked, and we wait. Wait for what? She whispered. For the next move. Those words sank inside her like cold water. The next move, it wasn't hers anymore. It wasn't Paul's. It belonged to whoever had already broken into her house, whoever had left footprints in the vault, whoever was following her in the shadows of rural roads. And soon, once the rumor reached the wrong mouth, more people would come looking, for treasure, for secrets, for blood. Maya closed her eyes as the truth pressed into her ribs. The vault had awakened something far more dangerous than greed. It had awakened the people who once guarded it. And now, every life around her, her own, Paul's, her daughter's, hung on a single fragile thread. How long could she keep the secret buried? As the farmhouse groaned under the shifting wind, Maya realized the terrifying answer: not long at all. By late afternoon, the sky over the farmhouse had darkened into a bruised, restless gray, heavy enough to press against the land, low enough to feel like it hovered just above the roof. Maya stood by the cracked window, watching the clouds churn, as though the world itself sensed what was coming. She didn't know how long she'd been standing there, minutes, hours. Time had lost meaning ever since the knock at the door, the knock that came and vanished without a trace. Paul had paced the house for a while, checking locks, checking windows, checking shadows. But eventually he fell silent too. Silence had become their enemy now. Maya kept replaying the smallest details, the faint scratches on the front door, the SUV watching from the road, the footprints leading out of the vault, the neat rows of gold bars stacked like sleeping giants in the underground. Each memory tightened around her chest like invisible hands. We need a plan, she murmured without turning. We can't just sit here waiting for them. Paul sighed from behind her. There's only one door, one basement, one way in, we're fine. She didn't believe him. The house creaked at that exact moment, the sound sliding down the hallway like a whisper. Both of them turned toward it, nerves taut, breath suspended. A simple noise shouldn't terrify them, but this house had taught them better. Paul rubbed his hands together, trying to shake off the building tension. Listen, we'll figure out who's watching. We'll find out what they want, and we'll deal with it. How? Maya whispered. We don't even know who they are. He didn't have an answer, and she felt that emptiness sink deep inside her. As daylight faded, she lit a single lamp on the table. Its glow stretched across the room, casting long shadows that trembled with every movement. Paul set the crowbar beside him, the metal cold and silent. A poor weapon, but the only one they had. The quiet grew thick, too thick, then a sound outside, soft footsteps on gravel. Maya's heart lurched. She stepped back from the window, gripping the edge of the wall as Paul moved toward the front door, silent and tense. The footsteps stopped just beyond the porch. A voice followed, calm, measured, masculine, speaking through the door with unnerving politeness. MS Delacroix. Maya froze. Only school records and county paperwork used her last name. No one close to her ever did. Paul lifted a hand, silently warning her to stay behind him. The voice continued, smoother than before. "We'd like to speak with you. We." Her stomach dropped. Paul clenched his jaw. "Who's we?" A soft chuckle drifted through the door. "Pleasant, practiced, wrong. People with an interest in your property." Maya shook her head, trembling. "Don't answer him." Paul tightened his grip on the crowbar. "You need to leave, now." Silence followed, but not the kind that meant retreat. A quiet, shifting breath pressed against the wood, as though someone on the other side leaned closer. "Maya Delacroix," the voice said, slower now. "You've discovered something that belongs to us." Her knees nearly buckled. Paul raised the crowbar, taking one step toward the door. "What are you talking about?" The reply came instantly, smooth, prepared, undeniably threatening beneath the politeness. "The vault beneath your home." Paul's hand tightened. "How do you know about that? We've known for years." A pause. "But you weren't supposed to open it." Cold rushed through Maya's chest, sharp as a blade. She covered her mouth, trying to quiet her breathing. Paul planted himself between her and the door, voice low and controlled. "If you don't leave, I'll call the sheriff." Silence. Then that voice again, amused. "The sheriff can't help you, Mr. Turner." Paul stiffened. "You're both in possession of federal property." The man continued calmly, "and interfering with it is a prosecutable offense." Maya felt the room blur. Something inside her snapped, and she stepped forward despite Paul's warning hand. "Who are you?" she demanded. A beat passed, then a quiet, almost indulgent answer. "Someone who wants what you found." The porch groaned softly, weight shifting, as if more than one man now stood outside. Paul's eyes widened. "There's more of them." She backed away from the door, hands shaking so badly she nearly slipped. The voice sharpened. "We're not here to hurt you, MS Delacroix, but we need to enter the residence." A pause. "You will let us in, one way or another." Her heartbeat thrashed in her ears. Paul mouthed to her, "Back door." She nodded. They stepped silently toward the kitchen. But before they could take 3 steps, another voice echoed from outside. A second man, closer, behind the house, doors and windows secured. Maya froze mid-step. They weren't alone at the front door. They were surrounded. Paul's breathing grew ragged. "How many of you?" "Enough." The first voice answered lightly. Then a shift in tone, sharper, colder. "MS Delacroix, 2 days ago you attempted to breach a restricted vault." Another pause. "We are here to reclaim what you found." Her blood iced. Paul stepped forward, rage seething through him. "You broke into her house, you followed her, you threatened her little girl, and you expect." A thud slammed against the porch railing outside, a warning, not subtle. The man spoke again, voice coiling like smoke under the doorframe. "You can hand over the vault's contents peacefully, or we'll take them by force." The last word hung in the air with deadly certainty. Maya stumbled back, gripping the table for balance. Her breath hitched as panic climbed her throat like wildfire. There it was, the truth she had feared, the danger she had felt creeping behind every step. These weren't curious men, not treasure hunters, not locals. They were professionals, organized, trained, certain of their right to take what they wanted. And they had no intention of leaving without the gold. Paul raised the crowbar again, but Maya saw the tremble in his arm. This wasn't a fight he could win. Maya, the voice called, now barely above a whisper. Open the door. The moment stretched thin, suffocating, like the last breath before a plunge into darkness. She locked eyes with Paul. They both knew the truth. This was no longer about curiosity or wealth, no longer about secrets or shadows. This was survival, and the men on her porch, the men who knew her name, her daughter, the vault had just declared war. The storm outside had finally reached her door, and this time it wasn't going to knock. The air inside the farmhouse grew so still it felt like all the oxygen had been drained from it. Maya pressed her back against the wall, fingers trembling against the peeling paint, while Paul positioned himself between her and the front door. Crowbar held like a lifeline he knew wouldn't save them. Outside, boots shifted softly on the porch. Low murmurs passed between the men, too faint to make out, too steady to be anything but trained communication. The house seemed to shrink around Maya, every creak in the floorboards echoing too loudly, every breath she took feeling like a beacon. The voice came again, calm, controlled, deadly. Ms. Delacroix, open the door. Paul glanced at her, sweat beading along his brow. We need to move back of the house, now. But before they could take a step, the doorknob twisted. Once, twice, slow, testing pressure. Maya flinched. Paul, go. He whispered fiercely, pushing her toward the hallway. She staggered backward, fear hollowing out her chest. If the door gave way, they'd have seconds, maybe less, to react. A heavy thud hit the wood, not enough to break it, just enough to warn her they could. Paul raised the crowbar. Come on, let's talk about this. From the other side, the man exhaled a quiet, dismissive sigh. Talking time is over. Another thud, this time harder. The frame rattled. Dust spilled from the ceiling. Maya, Paul hissed. She snapped out of her freeze and ran toward the back of the house, her footsteps soft and frantic on the old warped boards. The kitchen loomed in front of her in a blur of shadows and broken cabinets. She shoved her shoulder against the back door, locked, bolted, but as she reached for the latch, her blood iced. The bolt had already been cut. A perfect, clean slice through the metal. Someone behind the house had come prepared. Paul, she whispered, voice cracking. The back is compromised. Before he could answer, the front door reverberated under another hit. Stronger, heavier. Something scraped metal, a tool, a battering device. Paul looked over his shoulder, panic creeping into his voice. They're about to breach. Maya stumbled away from the back door just as a shadow moved outside the kitchen window. A tall figure passing by, too close, too silent. She dropped low, her breath trembling in short, sharp bursts. Another shadow followed, then a third. They weren't guessing their way around the house. They were surrounding it, coordinated, focused, professional. Maya, Paul called again. She crawled back toward him, fighting the rising terror in her lungs. When she reached the living room doorway, she saw Paul braced at the front door, crowbar pointed like a spear. The man outside spoke one final time. Last chance, Ms. Delacroix. His voice had changed. No more courtesy, no more pretense. Open the door, or we come in shooting. Maya's heartbeat shattered, fast, brutal, uncontrollable. She felt the room tilt, her vision flickering with fear. The thought of her daughter, safe at school, oblivious to the nightmare unfolding, pulled her back from collapse. Paul took a step toward her. We need to go into the basement. Maya shook her head violently. Paul, no, if they trap us. We don't have a choice, he snapped. It's the only place they can't storm instantly. Another blow slammed into the door. The lock shrieked under the pressure. He grabbed her hand, pulling her into motion. Together, they ran toward the basement door. The wood felt ice, cold against Maya's palm as she flung it open. The dark stairwell yawned beneath them like the throat of the house. Paul shoved her inside. Go, go, they descended quickly, every step echoing as the front door above them thundered again, wood cracking, metal screaming. Halfway down, Maya looked up and felt her stomach plunge. Light was flooding the hallway from the front door. They had breached the outer frame. Paul, she gasped. He slammed the basement door shut and threw his weight against it, bracing it with his shoulder. Heavy footsteps pounded into the house above. Voices barked orders. Furniture toppled. Drawers yanked open. They were searching. They knew they were close. Paul hissed through clenched teeth. Push something against it. Maya scanned the basement. Crates, a rusted shelving unit, a tool chest. She shoved the tool chest toward the door, muscles shaking with fear and adrenaline. It thudded into place just as the men reached the hallway above. The doorknob rattled, hard, then again, violent, furious. "Open this door," a new voice yelled, no calm, no pretense. Paul pressed his shoulder harder against it. Not today. Another hit shook the frame. Dust rained down. The hinges shrieked. Maya whispered, trembling, "They'll break through." "I know," Paul breathed. "But not before we move." He grabbed her wrist and pulled her down the final steps. The vault door, still open from earlier, gaped like a cold metal mouth at the center of the basement. Maya's breath caught. "Paul, we can't go in there. Someone's inside, and someone's outside." He snapped, "Pick your monster." The basement door exploded under another blow. Splintering, cracking. Voices barked commands through the widening gap. Paul pushed her toward the vault. "Maya, run." She stumbled into the corridor, heart roaring in her chest. Paul followed, yanking the vault door as far shut as he could behind them. It wouldn't lock, not fully, but it might slow their pursuers. The chamber stretched ahead, cold, metallic, oppressive. Every instinct in Maya screamed to stop. Then a sound, not from the hall behind them, not from the men breaking in, from inside the vault. A soft shift. A rustle, a breath that was not theirs. Paul froze beside her. Slowly, so slowly, Maya turned toward the darkness, and there, just beyond the faint edge of their flashlight beam, a silhouette moved, not a man breaking in. Not a thief, not one of the intruders, someone who had been waiting, someone who had already lived inside the vault. Paul whispered, voice shaking for the first time, "Maya, we're not alone in here." Behind them, the men at the basement door finally breached the stairwell. And ahead of them, the vault's first occupant stepped out of the darkness, closing them in on both sides. For a single, terrifying heartbeat, everything stopped. The air inside the vault turned solid, thick enough to choke on, and Maya felt her pulse hammer against her ribs as the silhouette in the darkness stepped forward. Slow, deliberate, unhurried. Paul raised his flashlight with trembling hands. The beam flickered, then caught the shape fully, a man, gaunt, dust-covered, eyes hollow but alert, gleaming with a sharp, feral intelligence that made Maya's skin crawl. His clothes were old, military fabric frayed at the seams, coated in years of grime, as though he had never left this underground labyrinth. His hands were filthy, trembling slightly, and his beard was tangled and untrimmed. But his stance, his posture, was unmistakably trained. He wasn't lost, he wasn't confused, he had been waiting. Before Maya could breathe, a shout erupted behind them, men pouring down the stairs, boots clattering against warped wood. Paul tensed, torn between the threat in front of them and the threat behind. "Stay behind me," he whispered. The feral man tilted his head, stepping further into the light. His voice cracked from disuse, harsh and broken. "You shouldn't have opened it." Maya's breath froze in her throat. Paul tightened his grip on the crowbar. "Who are you?" The man blinked slowly, eyes flicking toward the hallway where muffled voices barked orders. "They're coming." "We know," Paul said. Who are they?" The man looked at Maya instead, as though she were the only one in the room who mattered. "People who lost everything the day this place went dark." He rasped, people who want it back. Maya felt her pulse jump. The gold, the crates, no. His gaze sharpened, electric. They want what they left behind. Before she could ask what that meant, the basement door above them shattered with a thunderous crack. Wood splintered, metal bent. The intruders roared down the steps like a wave of violence. Paul grabbed Maya's arm, pulling her deeper into the corridor. Move, now. The feral man didn't chase. He melted back into the shadows, disappearing between the crates like a ghost slipping through old memories. Maya stumbled after Paul, breath trembling, heart ready to crack open. The corridor echoed with boots. Flashlights, voices, basement clear. Find the vault entry. Move, move, move. They were seconds away. The corridor branched into the storage chamber. Cold metal shelves rose on either side like jagged canyon walls. Maya pressed her back against a crate, chest heaving, ears filled with blood. Paul crouched beside her, whispering harshly, "We need to trap them, slow them down." She shook her head, terrified. With what? He pointed upward. The ventilation pipes, thick, rusted, coated in dust, ran across the ceiling like horizontal anchors. If they grouped behind the crates and shoved, they might topple an entire shelving row and block the entrance. "We move it together," Paul whispered. "Lean and push." She swallowed hard and nodded. They braced their shoulders against the towering shelf and pushed. It didn't budge, not an inch. Paul growled, shifting his weight. Again, boots thundered into the vault entrance. Contact, they're inside. They went through the corridor. 2 signatures. Panic surged into Maya's throat. She put every ounce of fear into her push. The shelf groaned, tilted, screamed. Then with a violent crash it fell. Metal and crates roared across the concrete floor, blocking the corridor like a barricade of steel. Shouts erupted behind the collapse. "Move that debris. They're close." Paul grabbed Maya's hand. "We bought 10 seconds, maybe 15. They ran. The vault stretched deeper than they had realized. Interconnected chambers, narrow passages, cold steel walls that amplified every breath. Maya's legs burned as she followed Paul through the maze. Her lungs ached, her thoughts tangled. The feral man's voice drifted through her memory. They want what they left behind. What did that mean? What could possibly be worse than the gold? What else could the vault contain? Ahead, the corridor opened into another chamber. Smaller, darker, filled with old electrical equipment and disassembled machinery. Dust hung thick in the air. Paul slammed the light switch, but nothing happened. The power had died decades ago. "Maya." Paul leaned close, voice trembling. "If they catch us, they won't." She didn't recognize her own voice, thin, brittle, fueled by terror. Then bootsteps echoed behind them again. Closer, heavier, vault chamber 1 clear, spread out, find the targets. Paul gritted his teeth. "They're splitting up. We need to keep moving." "But where?" Maya spun, eyes searching the dark chamber until something caught her eye, a hatch in the far corner, small, low to the ground, half rusted, but unlocked. Not one of the secret hatches from upstairs. Another way in, another way out. Paul saw it too. "Go," he whispered, pushing her ahead. They sprinted across the chamber, just as flashlight beams cut into the far doorway. There, movement. Bullets smashed into the metal walls, ricocheting, sparking, slicing through the darkness like angry sparks. Maya dove for the hatch. Paul grabbed the handle and heaved with raw desperation. It screeched open, just enough for her to slip inside. "Hurry," she cried, grabbing his arm. He crawled after her, pulling the hatch shut just as boots thundered into the chamber. Maya and Paul crawled through the narrow passage, dark, suffocatingly tight, air filled with dust. She could barely breathe, but fear kept her moving. Paul pushed after her, close enough that she heard every ragged breath. Behind them, metallic bangs slammed against the hatch, found their entry point, force it open. Maya's voice cracked. "Paul, they're right behind us, I know," he hissed. "Keep crawling." The passage twisted sharply, taking them deeper below the vault, deeper into the house's buried architecture. The air grew colder. Older, like they were moving into the untouched core of the structure. Then a faint light appeared ahead. Paul nudged her. "Go. Faster." She scrambled forward until the passage widened, opening into a small, hidden cavity, an unfinished chamber. Concrete floors, bare metal beams, and on the far wall another steel door, smaller, older, unmarked, a second vault. Maya's breath caught. "Paul, what is this?" He stared at the door, chest heaving, eyes wide. "I think we just found the part of the blueprint that wasn't meant to be opened." Behind them, the intruders pounded through the ventilation crawls, bass echoing closer, louder, relentless. Paul grabbed Maya's shoulders. "This is it. We either go in." He glanced back toward the darkness filled with men and guns, "or we die in the crawlspace." She stared at the old steel door, dust, covered, untouched, humming faintly with the same buried vibration she felt the first day she stepped into the farmhouse. Another secret, another danger, another truth buried under decades of silence. Maya swallowed hard, pulse shaking the breath from her lungs. "Paul," she whispered, eyes locked on the door. "Open it." Because whatever lay behind that second vault was their only chance left. Paul grabbed the wheel of the smaller steel door, straining against its cold, stiff resistance. His breath came out in sharp bursts, echoing in the cramped hidden chamber. Behind them, the metal of the crawlspace shuddered with each pounding strike. The intruders were almost through. Maya staggered back, every heartbeat straining against her ribs. The air tasted metallic, filled with dust and panic. "Paul, hurry, I'm trying," he growled, twisting the wheel with both hands, muscles quivering under the effort. The wheel screeched, unmoving for a moment that felt like a lifetime, until something deep inside the mechanism clicked. A single metallic shift, subtle, dangerous, awake. Maya froze. She recognized that sound. The vault beneath the floor, the vibration in the metal walls, the hum that followed her from the moment she set foot in this cursed house. All of them had the same signature. A living, dormant pulse of steel remembering it once had purpose. Another click, then a groan. The wheel loosened beneath Paul's grip. "It's opening," he gasped. But there was no relief, only a new, sharper fear sweeping across Maya's skin like cold fingers. As the door cracked open a few inches, a rush of air spilled out. Dry, stale, ancient. It felt as though the chamber behind it hadn't breathed in 40 years. The smell of metallic dust flooded the air with the weight of forgotten echoes. Behind them, the crawlspace shuddered violently. They had broken through. Voices roared into the passage, boots scraping against metal, flashlights burning into the darkness behind them. "Move, through here, they're close. Don't let them reach the interior vault." Paul's eyes widened. "They know about this door, of course they did. They had built this place. Paul, we don't have time," Maya cried. He yanked the door open wide enough for them to squeeze through, grabbing her arm and pulling her into the chamber beyond. Inside, the darkness swallowed them whole. The only light came from their flashlight beams, sweeping in shaky arcs across the interior. Maya exhaled a trembling breath as her eyes adjusted. This chamber was smaller than the first vault. More confined, more intentional. A single table sat bolted to the floor, covered in papers sealed under sheets of dust. Cabinets lined the walls, heavy, reinforced, locked. Thick cables ran along the ceiling, leading to machinery that no longer hummed but still carried the echo of once active power. But one thing arrested Maya's breath. At the center of the room sat a steel pod. Long, rounded edges, bolted shut, glass, covered gauge on the front, not a coffin, not a crate, something else, something designed to contain a person. Her pulse stuttered. "Paul, What is that? He stepped closer, shining the flashlight over the metal surface. The gauge was dust-coated but intact. Beneath the dust, Maya saw faded lettering etched into the steel. Hold 01 status, dormant. Her blood went cold. Is this where that man came from? She whispered. The one we saw. Paul hesitated, then nodded slowly. Maybe one of these was opened. But why would anyone lock a person inside here? Behind them, footsteps thundered into the crawl space. Maya jerked toward the noise. Shadows moved rapidly in the darkness, flashlights slicing the air like searchlights closing in on prey. They're almost through, she whispered, backing away from the door. Paul ran to the side of the chamber, scanning for anything they could use to reinforce the smaller vault door. He found a metal bar fallen from one of the old machines. He grabbed it. Help me jam it. Together they lifted the heavy bar and shoved it into the locking brackets of the door. It didn't seal it entirely, but it would slow the intruders. Seconds. They had seconds. Maya turned back to the pod. The steel surface was frozen cold beneath her fingertips. The metal carried vibrations, faint, subtle, but unmistakable, not mechanical, not electrical, alive. She snatched her hand back, heart spiraling. Paul noticed her trembling. Maya, don't. I think someone was in here, she whispered, or something. He shook his head. We don't need to know right now. We need to survive. But Maya couldn't look away. The pod seemed to pulse with a memory, like the echo of a heartbeat long stopped or long suppressed. Then the chamber door rattled violently. Open it. Push through. There in this room. Paul leapt in front of Maya, raising the crowbar again. Boots hammered against the metal. The sound vibrated through the floor, through Maya's bones, through the cold vault walls that had seen too many secrets. Her breath came in sharp, panicked bursts. Paul, they're almost in. I know, he snapped. Maya, focus. If there's another exit, now is the time to find it. She spun around, searching the room, the cabinets, the wall seams, the floor. Anything that could act as a hidden path deeper into the structure. Then she saw it, a small hatch in the concrete floor near the pod, tiny, almost invisible, locked with 4 latches. Her heart raced. Here, Paul ran to her side. What is it? I don't know. But it's the only way out. They dropped to their knees, frantically unlatching the metal clamps one by one. Each latch snapped open with a sharp metallic clack. Behind them a loud boom shook the room. One hinge bent. Screws tore from the wall. Light spilled through the widening crack around the door. There inside, a voice roared. Push harder. Paul unlocked the 3rd latch. Maya fumbled with the 4th, hands shaking too wildly to grip it. Paul grabbed her hand, steadying it. Maya, look at me. She lifted her eyes, tears trembling at the edges. We get out of here, he whispered. I promise. She nodded, breath breaking. Together they snapped the final latch. The hatch popped open. Cold air rushed upward, air that didn't belong to a basement, air that carried the scent of earth, damp soil, and roots. A tunnel, a hidden escape. Maya crawled in first, gripping the ladder. Paul followed, pulling the hatch shut above them just as the door burst open and armed men swarmed into the vault. Flashlight beams slashed across the chamber. Shouts echoed. Boots thundered. But the hatch hidden beneath dust and shadow remained unseen. Not forever, but long enough. As Maya and Paul descended the ladder into the darkness of the tunnel, Maya felt a final tremor vibrate through the steel walls. Not from the intruders, not from machinery. From the pod. One long, low hum resonated through the chamber above. A warning, a promise, something waking. Maya froze halfway down the ladder, eyes wide, breath gone. Paul, she whispered, voice quivering. Something else is alive in here. He didn't answer. He didn't need to, because far above them in the heart of the vault, the pod whispered back with a faint metallic shiver, as though it felt abandoned, as though it was calling for release. And as Maya dropped into the tunnel's crushing dark, one truth followed her. The men with guns were not the greatest threat in this house. Something older, something buried, something silenced for decades, was beginning to wake. The tunnel swallowed Maya and Paul in darkness so dense it felt alive, pressing against their skin, filling their lungs with the damp smell of buried earth. Each step sent echoes rippling down the narrow passageway, as though the tunnel itself was warning them to turn back. But the chaos behind them, the shouts, the pounding boots, the metallic crack of gunfire, pushed them deeper, forcing them into its choking embrace. Maya's hands trembled along the dirt walls as she followed the faint glimmer of Paul's flashlight. "Where does this even go?" she whispered. "Somewhere safer than where we were." Paul muttered, though fear threaded through his voice. Safer? The word felt hollow. Nothing in or under this farmhouse had ever been safe. They hurried forward until the tunnel widened abruptly, opening into a narrow underground chamber. The walls were rough, carved by hand and machine, a strange mix of raw stone and industrial intent. Dust coated everything in a grey veil that seemed to soften the edges of long, abandoned secrets. Maya steadied her breath, forcing her panic down. "What is this place?" Paul scanned the walls, the ceiling, the ground. Old infrastructure, maybe. Something they never finished. But Maya knew better. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't forgotten. This was intentional. The air carried the same metallic taste she had felt in the vault. The scent of sealed time, of buried machinery, of something left waiting. As they moved deeper into the chamber, Maya noticed faded markings on the walls. Not symbols this time. Words. Letters eaten by rust and age, barely legible under the dust. She brushed one with trembling fingers. Arcadia Sublevel 03, her stomach twisted violently. Paul, the folder, Operation Arcadia. He stepped closer, shining his light over the faded text. His face paled. "This goes deeper than any of us knew." A soft rumble vibrated through the chamber. Distant, deep, like the earth shifting somewhere far above them. Maya snapped her head upward. "They're searching the vault." "Yeah," Paul whispered. "And they'll find that hatch sooner or later." A cold realization seeped through Maya's bones. "They're not just searching for us," she said slowly. "They're searching for what they left behind." Paul hesitated. "The gold." "No." Her voice cracked with certainty. Because she remembered the feral man in the vault. His gaunt frame, his wild eyes, the way he whispered you shouldn't have opened it, like a warning carved into his soul. The gold hadn't broken him. Isolation had. Silence had. Being sealed underground had. And he wasn't the only one. She felt it. The pod's hum echoing through the metal. The shiver she felt as they closed the hatch. That wasn't just machinery reawakening. It was memory awakening. Maya pressed a cold hand to her mouth. "Paul, what if that pod wasn't the only one?" He exhaled shakily. "We need to keep moving." But as they stepped into the next narrow tunnel, something caught Maya's eye. A faint glimmer on the ground. She crouched, brushing away the dirt. A badge, metal, tarnished with age, its emblem half scraped away. She turned it in her hand, reading the engraved letters beneath the grime. "I. Crestwood Clearance, our level personnel. Internal oversight." She felt her blood freeze. Paul knelt beside her. "Is that a name?" She nodded. "Yes. But clearance." His voice dropped. "Our level. What does that even?" Maya remembered the crate labels. Restricted level R property of redacted. Her pulse hammered. "This wasn't a storage site," she whispered. "It wasn't a bunker. It wasn't a vault." Paul frowned. "Then what was it?" Maya lifted her eyes to him, the truth settling like stone in her chest. "It was evidence." Paul blinked. Evidence of what? The tunnel groaned softly around them, dust drifting from the ceiling like a shaken memory. Maya held up the badge. Evidence of something the government didn't want anyone to find. Something they hid under a fake farmhouse. Something they sealed inside those pods. Paul swallowed hard. Human evidence. Maya didn't answer. She didn't need to, because the pod wasn't just a container. It was a witness to secrets, to corruption, to vanished personnel, to crimes buried beneath concrete and silence. Paul rubbed his face, voice breaking. Jesus, Maya. But before either of them could speak again, the tunnel trembled with a deeper, sharper vibration. Not footsteps, not gunfire. A signal. A mechanical pulse reverberating through the underground structure, awakening systems that had been dormant for decades. Maya pressed her ear to the tunnel wall. The hum wasn't coming from the vault. It was coming from below. The system was still alive, and it had just been triggered. Paul pulled her away. We have to go. Now. But Maya remained frozen for a moment, staring into the darkness ahead as the pieces finally, horribly, fell into place. The erased owner, the classified files, the elimination sequence, the hidden pods, the feral survivor. Operation Arcadia had never been about treasure. It had been about silence, about burying the truth, about locking away the people who knew too much, and now the truth was waking up. Maya staggered to her feet, the weight of the realization nearly knocking her breath out. Paul, she whispered. He grabbed her hand. We're getting out, no matter what's down here. But Maya knew something terrifying, something she hadn't spoken aloud yet. They weren't just running from the men with guns, they were running from history. From a secret that had been sealed for a reason. From a truth dangerous enough to kill for. And the tunnel ahead, dark, narrow, trembling with growing resonance, was leading them deeper into the heart of that truth. As they ran, the hum beneath their feet grew stronger, and Maya knew this nightmare was not the climax, it was the revelation, and what waited in the next chamber would tear the truth wide open. The tunnel sloped downward so sharply that Maya had to brace her hands against the walls to keep from falling. The hum beneath the earth grew louder, stronger, more deliberate, no longer the faint memory of a machine, but the awakening of something that still had purpose. Dust rained from the ceiling in rhythmic patterns, as if answering the pulse of the unseen system. Paul kept her close, flashlight shaking in his grip. Just a little farther, he whispered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed how wrong everything felt. The tunnel bent sharply to the right, then opened. A cavernous chamber stretched before them, far larger than anything above it. Its walls curved inward like the ribs of a buried beast, each rib lined with thick cables and metallic conduits. Rusted catwalks wrapped around the perimeter, partially collapsed. The hum vibrated through everything, through the concrete, through the metal, through Maya's bones, and on the far side of the massive room, a wall of glass. Opaque, frosted, glowing faintly from within. Maya felt her breath catch. Paul, she whispered, what is that? He moved closer, shining the flashlight across the glass wall. His voice dropped to a horrified whisper. I think it's another containment unit. Maya approached slowly, her reflection shifting in the frost. She wiped the glass with her sleeve, her stomach dropped. Behind the glass was an entire corridor lined with pods, not one, not 2 dozen. Rows upon rows of them, each identical to the pod they'd seen in the vault above, some sealed, some broken, some dark, one glowing faintly with a dying blue light that flickered in and out like a heartbeat. Her pulse shattered. These were people. She whispered, all of them, they were people. Paul stepped beside her, clutching the railing as if it might steady him. Why would anyone put this under a house? Why bury all of this? Maya's voice trembled. Because they weren't meant to be found. She stared at the frozen glass until her breath fogged it. One pod in particular caught her attention. It was open. The inside was filthy, handprints smeared across the metal, claw marks etched into the frame, fabric torn where someone had fought their way out. The feral man, he had come from here. Her fingertips pressed harder against the glass. He wasn't the first. Paul turned sharply. What do you mean? She nodded toward another pod. This one sealed but cracked along the side, as if something inside had hit it once, hard enough to fracture the reinforced shell. Then another, light still flickering like a dying heartbeat. Then another, with the glass frosted from the inside, as though someone had exhaled long, slow breaths against it. For years, Paul's eyes narrowed, horror dawning. "Oh my God, this wasn't designed to hold treasure," Maya whispered. "It was designed to hold people who had evidence, people who knew things, people who—" Her voice broke. Paul swallowed hard. People they wanted erased. A sudden sharp vibration tore through the chamber, so strong it rattled the metal catwalks. Maya stumbled, catching herself on Paul's arm as a distant metallic screech echoed from deeper inside the facility. He steadied her. "We need to go. Now." But Maya's eyes were locked on something else. Something half buried under dust near the base of the glass wall. A file, yellowed, crumpled, torn from a binder decades ago. She reached down with trembling fingers and lifted it. The cover read, "Arcadia Personnel Final Trance." Verlog, her breath hitched as she opened it. The pages listed names, dozens of them, all with clearance levels and red stamps reading, "Transferred R, level intake, non-recoverable." Subject sealed, not transferred, not relocated, buried. Her throat tightened until she could barely swallow. Paul. These are the people they locked down here. He looked over her shoulder, jaw clenched. They buried them alive. A chill swept through Maya. But why the pods? Why keep them alive at all? Paul didn't answer, because the answer was obvious. The pods weren't coffins. They were cages. Cages designed to keep witnesses breathing. But silent forever, the chamber vibrated again, louder, deeper, followed by a faint hiss that made Maya's blood run cold. Paul spun toward the tunnel entrance. "They're coming, we have to move." But Maya didn't turn. Her flashlight had landed on something farther down the row of pods, something that froze her every muscle. One pod was active, not dead, not dying, active. Its lights pulsed steadily. Its gauge flickered green. And a thin fog seeped around the edges, as though the seal was beginning to melt. "Maya," Paul whispered urgently, "we have to go now." But she couldn't move, her feet rooted to the floor as she watched frost slide down the pod's surface. And a faint silhouette shift inside, a shape, a human form, alive. Paul grabbed her arm, pulling hard. "Maya," she whispered, voice cracking with horror, "they're waking up." As they backed away from the glowing pod, Maya saw movement behind the frosted glass, hands pressing up from inside as something alive tested its confinement. The hum intensified. The lights flickered. The sealed corridor behind the glass rumbled like a beast stretching after decades of stillness. The system hadn't malfunctioned. It had activated. Someone, maybe those men upstairs, maybe Paul, maybe she, had triggered the reawakening protocol of Operation Arcadia. And the people they thought were victims, the people sealed away beneath the farmhouse, the people erased from every government record, were still here, breathing, waiting, waking. As Maya and Paul fled deeper into the unknown tunnels, she felt the ground tremble under her feet, and understood with bone, deep certainty that the truth she had found was far more alive than the men hunting her. And it wasn't done revealing itself. The tunnels twisted into a descent that felt less like a path and more like a test. Tight passages that scraped their shoulders, sudden drops that forced them to crawl, and sharp turns that disoriented Maya until she no longer knew which direction the surface was. Only the sound of Paul's breath beside her grounded her in the moment, harsh, ragged, terrified. But even fear couldn't silence what followed them. The hum behind the walls had changed. It wasn't mechanical anymore. It was rhythmic, alive, growing stronger with every passing second, pulsing through the earth like a heartbeat too large to belong to a single person. Maya crawled forward until the tunnel widened again into a small, dim chamber. The ceiling here was lower, the air stale, thick with dust from decades of sealed silence. She collapsed onto the dirt, chest heaving, palms trembling violently. Paul slid beside her, leaning his back against the wall. Sweat streaked through the grime on his forehead. We can't keep going blind. We need a direction. Maya lifted her trembling hands, wiping dirt from her face. Paul, her voice broke. Those people, the ones in the pods, they're alive. She still couldn't make sense of it. Couldn't reconcile the image of the frost, covered glass with the beating lights, the shifting silhouette inside, the fog seeping through old steel. Paul closed his eyes. We don't know how many. We saw dozens of pods, she whispered. Dozens, Paul. His jaw clenched. And each one of them has been down here for decades. Her stomach twisted painfully. What kind of government buries its own workers alive? The kind that's trying to kill us right now, he murmured. His words struck her like cold water. She hugged her arms around herself, fighting the tremor creeping up her spine. A distant echo thundered through the tunnel, muffled shouts. Metal striking metal. Footsteps pounding against the vault floors. The intruders were spreading deeper into the underground maze. Paul stood, raising his flashlight. We move, but Maya didn't stand. She stared at the dirt beneath her knees, her breath trembling as a memory rose unbidden. Her daughter's voice on the voicemail, soft and innocent, oblivious to the nightmare unfolding underground. Her daughter. Maya closed her eyes, and for a moment everything else fell away. The vault, the gold, the pods, the men hunting them, the vibration in the walls. She saw only her little girl, smiling, laughing, waiting for her mother to come home. Her heart ached so fiercely it felt like it might break. Maya, Paul whispered, kneeling in front of her. Hey, look at me. She lifted her gaze, eyes shining with tears. We need to stay alive. I know, she whispered. I don't know how. I don't know what choice to make. Paul took a long, steadying breath. Then let's focus on one choice at a time. He pointed down the tunnel. First, we survive. Then we figure out how to bring the truth to the surface. The truth. The word struck her deeply, because she knew that once this truth came out, nothing would ever be the same, not for her, not for her daughter, not for the men hunting her, not for the people sealed beneath the earth. Maya, his voice softened, I know what you're thinking. No, you don't. You're thinking about your little girl, and you're thinking about the gold, and you're thinking about what all of this could mean for her future. Her breath cracked. She deserves better. She deserves safety. She deserves a life free from everything I've been through. And she'll have it, Paul said firmly, but not if you die down here. Silence washed over them, thick and heavy. Above them, a metallic shriek echoed through the tunnels. One of the intruders prying open another door, another hatch, another barrier. They were running out of time. Maya wiped her tears with the back of her sleeve. Paul, if we escape, if we make it out, what then? What do we do with the gold, with the documents, with the truth? Paul hesitated. This was the question he'd avoided from the moment they discovered the vault. I don't know, he admitted quietly, but whatever choice we make, it has to be the right one. She stared at him, then at the tunnel stretching before them, then at the darkness behind them where the men, and the waking survivors, were closing in. And then she understood. This wasn't about her, not anymore. This was about the truth buried beneath the farmhouse, the crimes it held, the lives stolen, the secrets sealed in steel, the people forgotten. This was about justice. Deep in her chest, something shifted. Fear giving way to resolve, fragile resolve, trembling resolve, but real. Maya stood slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. Her voice steadied even as her heart raced. "We expose all of it." Paul looked at her, really looked, and a flicker of respect crossed his face. "You know what that means." "Yes," she whispered. "It means giving up the gold, giving up the money, giving up the chance to change my life overnight. And your daughters," Paul added gently. Maya swallowed the sting that came with the truth. "She deserves a mother who made the right choice," Maya whispered, "not one who ran away with blood money." Paul nodded slowly. "Then that's our path." A distant clang echoed again. Closer, sharper, urgent. Maya turned toward the narrowing tunnel ahead. "Let's go," she said, voice filled with new strength. "We still have a chance." Paul steadied the flashlight. "Then we make it count." As they stepped deeper into the tunnel's darkness, shoulder to shoulder, breath to breathe, the hum beneath the earth followed them like a promise. Truth was coming to the surface, and once it broke through, nothing buried in this house would stay hidden ever again. The choice had been made. Now they had to survive long enough to see it matter. The tunnel narrowed until Maya had to duck, her breath brushing the cold stone ceiling as she moved forward. Paul's flashlight beam wavered on the walls, catching glimpses of rusted pipes, old bolts, and long, forgotten cables that once fed power into the belly of Operation Arcadia. Every few steps, distant vibrations rippled through the ground, footsteps, machinery, voices. The underground was no longer silent, it was waking, all of it. Maya kept going, one trembling step after another, her mind a whirl of choices she never asked for. Her daughter's voice, soft and innocent, clung to her memory like a tether pulling her toward the world above. "She's waiting for me, she needs me." The gold, the fortune that could have changed everything, felt like a distant temptation now, eclipsed by a truth she couldn't unsee. Those pods were filled with people whose lives had been stolen. Voices silenced, futures erased. She wasn't supposed to find them. No one was, but she had. And now she had a responsibility far greater than $130 million. The tunnel widened into an abandoned service chamber. Walls cracked, a burst pipe dripping thick mineral water into a shallow puddle that shimmered beneath the flashlight. Paul swept the beam across the floor. A ladder, a rusted metal ladder, bolted to the wall, leading upward into darkness. He stared at it, breathless. This might be our way out. Maya nodded numbly, gripping one of the rungs, the metal bit cold into her hands. She glanced up. An endless shaft swallowed in shadows. "Do you think it's safe?" she whispered. "No," Paul admitted, "but safer than turning back. Safer than facing the men hunting them. Safer than facing the waking survivors of Arcadia. Safer than being trapped beneath decades of sealed crimes." Maya took the first step. The ladder groaned under her weight, flaking rust drifting down like dead snow. Her hands burned with each rung she gripped, but she forced herself upward. One step, then another, then another. Paul followed close behind. Halfway up, the chamber shuddered with a muffled explosion. Dust blowing up the shaft and choking her lungs. Paul cursed. They found another door. Maya climbed faster. Her breath quickened, panic flaring. Every sound from below felt too close. Voices barking orders, boots slamming into metal, the steady hum of machines reactivating in the deep. She reached the top of the shaft and pushed her palm against a small metal hatch. It resisted, stuck from years of immobility, but she shoved harder, straining until her wrist screamed. Finally it gave. Cool air poured in, fresh, open air. Her heart raced as she lifted herself out of the hatch and onto a dusty concrete slab. The room she emerged into was small, an old utility station, abandoned, walls covered in peeling paint and rusted control panels. A single service door stood on the far side, blocked by a fallen cabinet. She turned back and extended her hand. Paul, come on. He climbed the last few feet and pulled himself up, chest heaving, face streaked with dirt. Together, they pushed the cabinet aside just enough to open the door. A wave of warm, evening air rushed in. They stepped out into a clearing behind the farmhouse, farther from the structure than Maya expected. The old utility shed behind them must have looked like nothing but overgrown ruins to anyone passing by. Vines crawled up its broken walls, wild grass choking its foundation. Maya stood there, blinking against the dying light of the day. They had made it out for the moment. They had survived, but relief lasted only seconds. The farmhouse stood in the distance, dark against the horizon, its windows glowing with flashlight beams. Men were inside, men were outside. The SUV were parked at angles along the property line, door open, radios humming. They were searching for her, for them, for the truth. Paul grabbed her elbow, pulling her behind a cluster of tall brush. We need to keep moving. They'll sweep the shed soon. Maya nodded, ducking low as they crept away from the clearing, every muscle trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. Her mind raced. They needed evidence. They needed protection. They needed someone who could bring Operation Arcadia into the light. Not the county sheriff. He'd be outmatched. Not the local police. Too small, too corruptible. Not even the state authorities. This was bigger, much bigger. Maya, Paul whispered, his voice tight, if we leave now, if we walk away, we can vanish, we can take some of the gold and disappear. No one would ever know. She stopped, turned to him slowly. His eyes searched hers, not greedy but desperate, desperate to survive, desperate to help her survive. We can't beat them, he whispered. We can't expose this alone. They'll kill us long before the story ever reaches daylight. A painful truth. A tempting truth. The kind of truth that could make a weaker person run. But Maya wasn't weak. She thought of the badge she found, Crestwood, non-recoverable. She thought of the man who escaped his pod, wild, broken, trapped in the dark for decades. She thought of the rows of pods still glowing. She thought of the documents in her coat, stuffed into her pocket when they fled, and she thought of her daughter, smiling, innocent, counting on a mother who fought to survive the darker parts of life. Maya shook her head slowly. Paul, if we walk away now, they win. The truth dies down there. Those people die down there. He swallowed hard, and we might die up here. She exhaled, feeling her fear transform, not disappearing, but reshaping itself into something steadier. We won't, Maya whispered. Not if we choose the right allies. Not if we choose the truth. Paul looked away for a long moment, jaw tight. Then he nodded. Okay, he said. Then we do this your way. A final echo boomed in the distance. Lights flickered across the farmhouse as the intruders fanned outward, calling orders, their search widening. Time was nearly gone. Maya squared her shoulders, gripping the documents inside her coat, the only weapon she had against a decades-old conspiracy. We expose all of it, she said softly, for the people they buried, for the ones waking up, for the ones still waiting to be found. Paul stepped beside her, ready. Then let's disappear into the dark first, he said quietly. So we can bring the truth into the light later. Maya nodded. The hardest choice had been made. Now they had to survive long enough to make it matter. And as they slipped into the shadows of the tree line, leaving the haunted farmhouse behind, Maya heard a distant hum rising from beneath the earth, as if the buried truth was following them. Morning sunlight broke through the tree line like a slow, forgiving tide, golden, soft, nothing like the harsh beams that had once exposed the rot and ruin inside the farmhouse. Maya stood at the crest of the rebuilt gravel path, breathing in the cool air as though her lungs were tasting freedom for the first time in years. The land felt different now, lighter, safer, alive. It was hard to believe that beneath her feet the earth had once groaned with hidden vaults, humming metal and secrets sealed into silence. Now the farmhouse, no longer haunted or hunted, stood renewed, its weathered bones restored into something warm, inviting, and whole. Children's laughter spilled from the open windows. The smell of simmering soup drifted from the old kitchen. Voices carried through the yard, calm, hopeful voices. A year ago, this place had nearly destroyed her. Today it was saving others. Maya walked toward the porch, running her fingers along the handrails she and Paul sanded and painted themselves. Their brushstrokes still showed faintly beneath the fresh coat of white, a reminder of how far they'd come. The farmhouse, once waterlogged and collapsing, gleamed in the morning light, reborn into a community shelter for families with nowhere else to go. No gold funded this transformation. No stolen fortune lifted the beams or restored the walls. Truth had done that. Courage had done that. Accountability, finally delivered, had done that. When Maya and Paul had stepped out of the woods that night, battered and shaken, they carried not wealth but evidence. Evidence that exposed a buried network of corruption, a decade-old operation built on silence and stolen lives. Evidence the authorities could no longer deny. The world above ground had listened. Investigations unraveled the truth piece by piece. Former officials faced justice. Families of the forgotten received long-delayed answers. And Maya, whose courage had ignited the unraveling, was awarded compensation that no longer felt like blood money, but like the beginning of something clean. Enough to rebuild, enough to give back, enough to turn a place of fear into a home of healing. Maya's breath caught as she turned. Her daughter, bright-eyed, ponytail swinging, raced down the porch steps and collided into her arms. Maya closed her eyes, holding her tight, feeling the weight of a year crumble into dust against the warmth of that small embrace. "You're going to be late for the opening," her daughter giggled, pulling back with a grin. "People are already waiting," Maya laughed softly. "Am I?" "Uh-huh, and Paul said if you're late, he'll pretend he did all the work." Maya rolled her eyes, smiling. He would say that. As if summoned by the teasing, Paul stepped onto the porch, a stack of papers in one hand and sawdust still clinging stubbornly to his sleeves. He raised an eyebrow at Maya, pretending to look insulted. "Hey, I heard that." "You were meant to," Maya replied. He grinned, an easy, honest grin she hadn't seen from him in the early days of terror and tunnels and vaults. Time had softened him, just as it had softened her. They were different people now, shaped by darkness but strengthened by what they did with the light afterward. "You ready?" Paul asked, nodding toward the newly rebuilt entrance. Maya exhaled slowly, looking at the shelter. Their shelter. The rooms they had rebuilt, the basement they had sealed for good, the new structure built entirely above, ground where sunlight could reach every corner. This house wasn't a hiding place anymore. It was a beginning. Maya took her daughter's hand. "Let's open the doors." They walked toward the entry together, and Maya paused just before grasping the handle. Her eyes drifted to the small plaque installed beside the doorway, a simple bronze square she had polished the night before. It read, "In honor of the anonymous whistleblower whose courage lit the path to truth. Your voice saved us." She let her fingers rest against the cool metal for a moment. The world would never know his name, the man who had built the vault, who had attempted to expose the corruption, who had vanished into the silence Operation Arcadia forced upon him. But Maya knew, and this house reborn from fear into hope would carry his legacy. Her daughter tugged gently at her hand. "Mama," Maya blinked, letting out a soft breath. "Coming." She pushed the door open, sunlight flooding the newly built entry hall. Voices rose in greeting, warm, grateful voices from families who once slept in cars, in motels, in shelters too full to offer comfort. This farmhouse had room for them all now. It had room for healing. Room for new stories, room for laughter that didn't echo through broken beams but filled bright, open spaces. Maya stepped inside, her daughter running ahead to join the cluster of kids exploring the playroom. Paul followed with the paperwork, muttering about schedules and fire codes, and Maya felt an ache rise in her chest. Not pain, not fear, something gentler, peace. As she welcomed the first family through the door, she felt it settle fully. The farmhouse had once tried to bury her under its secrets, but in the end it had saved her, and now it would save others. The shadows were gone, the vault was sealed, the truth had risen, and the house, once an omen of ruin, had finally become the blessing it was always meant to be. Maya smiled softly as sunlight warmed the room. The story wasn't closing, it was opening, and somewhere deep in the earth below, quiet now, no longer stirring the past, rested at last. The ribbon-cutting ceremony began with far less fanfare than the story behind it deserved. A small crowd gathered on the front lawn. Neighbors, local volunteers, the county social workers who had helped secure the permits, and a handful of families whose lives mirrored the one Maya once lived. People stood with hopeful eyes, bundled jackets, and steaming cups of coffee as they waited for her to speak. Maya stood at the newly built entrance, the morning sun warming her shoulders. Her daughter clung to her arm, proud and beaming, as though she were convinced her mother had built the entire house with her bare hands. Paul stood quietly off to the side, wearing the same humble half-smile he always slipped into when he didn't want attention. No one here knew the full truth, not the danger, not the tunnels, not the vault, not the lives sealed beneath the earth. Most of Operation Arcadia's details remained locked behind federal investigations and classified hearings. But the part that mattered, the corruption exposed, the stolen wealth reclaimed, the justice delivered, had reached the surface. Her name had been cleared. The whistleblower's legacy had been honored. The danger had been extinguished. Maya inhaled a steady breath, then stepped forward. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion trying to climb up her throat. "This house was once abandoned, forgotten, left to rot during the worst storm the county has seen in decades. But like so many people who end up needing a place like this, even the broken things deserve a chance to be rebuilt." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Her daughter squeezed her hand tighter. Rebuilding this farmhouse was more than repairing wood and clearing the flood damage. Maya continued. It was about taking the weight of everything that happened here and turning it into something good, something that belongs to all of us. She paused, letting her gaze drift across the faces watching her, some tired, some weary, some quietly hopeful, for families who need time, for parents who need help, for kids who deserve a safe home when life falls apart. Her voice thickened. And for people who need a place to start again. Paul's eyes softened from where he stood watching her, no longer the man caught in survival's teeth, but someone grounded, steady, changed. Maya cut the ribbon. Applause swept across the yard, not loud or wild, but warm, genuine, full of gratitude. Children darted past her into the playroom, laughter bouncing off the freshly painted walls. A mother wiped a tear as she stepped inside, overwhelmed by the idea of safety. Two social workers exchanged relieved smiles, and Maya felt something inside her settle for the first time in years. As she stepped back from the doorway, Paul approached her with a quiet chuckle. "You did good," she nudged him lightly. "We did good." "No," he murmured, his voice earnest. "This was you." Maya glanced around, at the sunlight pouring through rebuilt windows, at families exploring rooms that had once been soaked in mold and fear, at her daughter chasing new friends through the hallway. "I think," she whispered, "it was meant to be all along." Paul nodded slowly, letting the weight of her words sink into the warm morning air. Hours passed in a gentle rhythm, tours, conversations, the thrill in children's voices as they discovered bunk beds and donated toys. The farmhouse felt alive again, each laugh echoing through the beams like the house itself was breathing for the first time. By late afternoon, when most visitors had left, Maya wandered out to the back porch. The sun dipped low, painting gold across the distant hills. A soft breeze carried the scent of grass and warm earth. Paul joined her in the doorway, leaning against the frame. "You okay?" Maya nodded, though a faint ache curled in her chest. An ache not of sadness, but of remembering. "I keep thinking about him," she said softly, "the whistleblower who built all of this, who tried to expose everything on his own." "He'd be proud," Paul replied gently. Maya's eyes drifted to the plaque again, the bronze surface catching the sunset like a small flame. "He didn't survive to see the truth come out," she whispered, "but maybe this is how we carry him forward." Paul stepped beside her. "This house is more than a shelter. It's a memorial, a promise." Maya breathed deeply, letting his words settle. "A promise? Yes. This place wasn't built to hide a secret anymore. It was built to honor one." The screen door creaked behind them. Maya turned to see her daughter standing with two other kids, laughing breathlessly from play. "Mama," she called out, "can we go see the garden?" Maya felt warmth swell in her chest. "Go on," she said. "I'll be right there." The kids dashed off, their laughter trailing behind them. Paul watched them go, then nodded toward the field. "Let's walk." They moved toward the garden together, the small patch of earth Maya had insisted on cultivating. A place for vegetables, for flowers, for something living to take root in the soil where darkness once lay buried. As they approached, Maya felt the gentle tug of closure. For the first time since she'd bought the ruined farmhouse, her steps didn't echo with fear. They echoed with purpose, with peace, with hope. By the time the last light faded over the horizon, Maya stood at the garden's edge, hands tucked into her pockets, heart full. She had opened doors that were never meant to be opened, uncovered truths that were meant to die underground, walked through darkness no one should ever walk through alone. And now she had built a sanctuary from those ruins, a place for new beginnings, a place for healing, a place for others to rise from their own storms. As the night settled softly over the farmhouse, Maya lifted her face to the warm twilight breeze. The shadows were gone, the fear was gone, and the house, reborn and redeemed, had become exactly what she needed it to be. A home that saved her. A home that would save many more. And as the last traces of sunlight kissed the fields, Maya understood with quiet certainty, this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a legacy.